What's up everyone, how are you all? Today we are back with another amazing Naruto story. What if Minato sacrificed his son instead of the village? If you enjoy, then please like, share and do comments, and also check the description box to original creator of this beautiful creation. Timeline. Kakashi Gaiden, third person POV. A trembling blood-stained Obito hesitantly walked over to the spot where Rin lay, a hole straight through her chest. With each agonizing step he took, his heart pounded louder and louder in his chest. Finally reaching the spot next to her, he crouches down and slowly extends a shaking hand to touch her neck, but he made no contact. Instead, his fingers passed straight through her. Shocked at what just happened, Obito lets out a sharp breath and pulls back. His eyes widened as the Sharingan burned brightly in both of them. Calming himself down, he takes in a deep breath while closing his eyes and slowly reaching his hand out to feel her pulse. It was a miracle. She was alive. Obito was happy, but his joy quickly turned to panic. He didn't know what to do. I can't wait for any other shinobi to arrive, and the nearest hospital is too far away. What do I do? Seeing Obito's panicked state, the swirly-faced Zetsu clone around his body took control and picked Rin up. Swirly? What are you doing? The Uchiha asked confused. Helping you. I can save her, but we need to leave quickly. I sense reinforcements approaching. The Zetsu clone responded before sprinting back in the direction they came. Obito didn't know what to say. He merely stayed quiet the whole way back to Madara's base and continuously paced around nervously as Swirly repaired Rin's wound, filling it up with Zetsu cells. On the other side of the room stood a shadowy figure, leaning against the wall. His long black hair flowed down to his middle back and over one half of his face. His only visible eye was narrowed as the familiar pattern of a three-tomo Sharingan glowed brightly in it. It was Madara. The Uchiha elder was not happy in the slightest about how this situation turned out, but he dared not speak a word. He stood there watching Obito pace around, keeping his lips sealed as nothing but an irritated grunt left his throat. Madara knew that if he spoke his mind right now it would only result in Obito storming off and possibly even returning to Konoha, causing him to lose his only hope of completing Project Tsuki no Mi. After a while Swirly delivered the news to Obito. Rin was gonna be fine. The meta-human was rewarded with 100 consecutive thank yous from Obito. As for his reward from Madara, it was a hateful glare that made his skin run cold. The meta-human then immediately melted into the ground to avoid the Uchiha elder's wrath. Despite being alive, Rin was in a comatose and there was no telling when she would wake up. This saddened Obito as he stood beside her bed with a frown on his face. Madara finally spoke up as he stood upright and approached the boy, his arms crossed over his chest. "What is your plan now, Obito?" he asked in his deep voice as he came to a stop right before Obito, towering over the boy. I don't know," was all he answered as he lowered his head, his gaze trailing to the floor. "I don't want to go back to Konoha. Not after they allowed this to happen. What you said was true, Madara. I see it clearly now more than ever. This reality is a hell. This reality is indeed a hell, Obito, but you know how to change it. You know how to sever the nexuses of this world. So, will you do it, or will you leave it as it is and risk something even worse than this happening?" Madara asked sternly. Since the plan didn't entirely work, he might as well pull a few strings and tip the scale in his favor once more. Madara started his manipulation game all from over, attempting to nudge Obito to joining him. The younger Uchiha was silent as he thought about what Madara said. His eyes trailed back to the girl he loved, laying in a comatose with a newly repaired hole in her chest. A pain shot through his heart. He didn't want anything like this to happen again. "No, I won't take a risk like this again. Never again. I will sever the nexuses of this world and create a perfect reality. For her. And for everyone else out there who desire a peaceful life." Obito's answer made Madara smirk. His plan had worked. "Very well then. From today on, you will be my new subordinate. I will train you well and shape you into a perfect shinobi. One worth holding the title of an Uchiha prodigy, unlike the failures who unfairly gained the title in the accursed era we live in today." He then went on, telling Obito more about Project Tsuki no Mi and transferred Kuro Zetsu to Shiroi Zetsu. Even though he did this, Madara had no intention of fully entrusting the plan to Obito. He didn't fully trust the boy. He thought Rin would get in the way as well, so he decided to keep a keen eye on Obito and stick around just to keep the situation in his favor. Time skip. Third person POV. After Obito had pledged loyalty to Madara and agreed to help him achieve Project Tsuki no Mi, he focused all his energy on training, mastering his Mangekyo Sharingan and perfecting his jutsu and battle tactics. He needed to improve and advance far beyond his current strength in order to be on par with Minato if he wanted to successfully get the Kyuubi for Madara. It was a long and agonizing 6 months of hardcore training, going so far as to spar with Madara for at least 2 hours a day consecutively. His free time wasn't easy either. By orders from Madara, he was to pop into Konoha every single day and keep a close eye on his target, Uzumaki Kushina. It pained Obito to know that the very person he was going to attack was the woman he considered as a mother to him since his days at the academy. Pushing himself to his absolute limit, Obito was finally able to reap the fruits of his struggle. Since his training had begun, his chakra capacity had doubled in size, his skill in ninjutsu, taijutsu and genjutsu went from a 5 to a 10 and his battle IQ and sheer skill advanced greatly. The day Obito concluded that he was at least Anbu rank was the day Madara decided he was ready. All he had to do now was wait until the seal weakened while Kushina gave birth. Obito was really angry at Minato for allowing this to happen to both himself and Rin, but he hated him even more for becoming Hokage and leading Konoha to its doom by sucking up to Hashirama's teachings, as Madara put it. Still, it was an agonizing emotional struggle for him. He couldn't completely cut off his feelings towards his sensei or Kushina. They had made too big of an impact in his life. The guilt on his shoulders grew tenfold, knowing what was to come just a few days later. Since he popped into Konoha a lot to stay updated on the situation to plan his attack strategy, Obito had overheard a lot of conversations between Minato and Kushina. He heard them make all sorts of plans for the future and talking about the perfect life they envisioned for themselves and their child. The most recent one affected him the most emotionally. Minato and Kushina had invited a few family members and close friends for dinner before Kushina's due date. Raiden, Riko, Kakashi, Jiraiya, Fugaku, Makoto Itachi and baby Sasuke. If he has blonde hair you can name him. But if it's red, that means I name him, TT Ebane. Kushina said with that same cheeky smile on her face that always made his day as a genin. Okay. If he has my hair I'll name him Naruto. Minato said in a cheery voice. How about you, Kushina Ne-chan? Riko asked, her violet eyes staring at her sister with her head tilted and entire facial expression gleaming with excitement. Yeah, what are you gonna name him? A 5-year-old Itachi asked, his onyx orbs clouded with curiosity as well. Kushina hummed, placing a finger on her chin, I haven't quite thought about that yet. But I want his name to be fire-related. Why? You want his name to be intimidating like your nickname, Red Hot Habanero? Kakashi asked playfully, earning a few laughs and giggles from everyone. Even a short chuckle from Obito, who was listening in from halfway inside his Kamui dimension. He strongly disliked Kakashi, but that doesn't mean his joke wasn't funny enough to laugh at. No, actually, I want to name him that because fire was Obito's affinity. Hearing those words made Obito's chest twist. And even now in the present, as he slipped his mask and black hooded cloak on, his heart ached as he remembered her words. Kushina truly cared about him, considering him a son. Minato thought about him the same way. They have both always been so warm and welcoming as well as protective and supportive of him no matter how badly he screwed up. They were always there. And even when he failed they never scolded him or made him feel bad, unlike Kakashi. That was all the more reason for him to reconsider his actions. After putting his mask on he stood in the doorway of the cave, debating whether he should do this or not. You better not be having second thoughts, brat. Madara's voice cut through the silent air like a knife, making Obito tense out of fear and come to his senses. Because if you are. Madara glared at him, his eyes beginning to glow red with the Sharingan. Obito flinched and stuttered fearfully while shaking his head furiously and holding his hands up defensively. No. Of course not. We need the tailed beasts to achieve Project Tsuki no Mi, the Eye of the Moon plan. I'll bring you the Kyuubi. No emotional attachments will get in the way of this mission. I promise, Madara. You better extract that Biju or you're in for one hell of a torturous punishment, Obito. A shiver ran down his spine. I chose to follow Madara. I chose to go down this path, the path of darkness. Now I had to embrace it. Just suck it up and do it." And so the 14-year-old Uchiha slipped the hood of the cloak over his head, grabbed his Kusari chains and a pouch full of kunai and warped away to attack his former home village. Date: October 10th. Third person POV. After taking out the Anbu Black Ops assigned to guard Kushina, Obito re-entered his Kamui dimension and watched from there as Kushina delivered her long-awaited baby boy. His hair was bright red, just like his mother, and even though he was a newborn, he was quite a handful, whining and wriggling in Bawako's arms, fighting persistently to escape her grasp. The feisty little baby only quieted down and stopped his little tantrum when Bawako handed him over to Minato. As if sensing Minato was his father, he calmed down immediately and slipped off into a peaceful slumber. Tears of joy streamed down Minato's cheeks as he took in the sight of his long-awaited son in his arms. But his joy was quickly replaced by concern when he heard Kushina wince and strain while biting her lip, holding back a scream. "Kushina, what's wrong?" The words he heard next made his eyes widen. "She's still in labor. You're having twins, Yondaime-sama," Taji, the assistant medical ninja, informed him. Bawako took over delivering the second baby while Taji set the first baby in a bed they had prepared beforehand, and Minato went straight back to keeping Kyuubi's seal in check. "Twins, huh? I wish I could congratulate you, Minato-sensei. I'm sorry for what I'm about to do," Obito thought to himself, nails digging into his palms as he clenched his fists tightly. After Kushina had delivered the second twin, Bawako and Taji immediately took him to the same bed as his brother while Minato prepared to rebuild the seal, only to hear a yelp of pain and two thuds. He turned his head only to see both Bawako and Taji, face first in the ground, blood pooling around them, and a masked Mad standing over their bodies with his son in his hand. Fourth Hokage Minato, step away from the Jinchuriki, or else this child will die in its first minutes of life. Obito spoke using Madara's voice. From here on, everything progresses like in the anime. Minato saves both his sons from the mysterious intruder. Obito releases the 9 tails from inside Kushina and uses it to attack the village. Kurama blasts a Biju Dama at Minato and he transports it away from the village. But after this, things progress differently. When Minato actually fights Obito, the Uchiha actually uses both the Kusari chains and the kunai to fight Minato. When the Hokage tries to hit him with Rasengan, Obito manages to use Kamui just in time to let the sphere of rotating chakra pass through him. Minato hadn't managed to mark Obito, and after focusing the majority of his chakra on fighting Minato, he ran out and couldn't control Kyuubi anymore. Having almost no chakra left, Obito was forced to retreat to his Kamui timespace and wait for his chakra to replenish. Meanwhile, Minato had managed to get the 9 tails away from Konoha, and Kushina restrained the beast with adamantine sealing chains. After much protest from Kushina, they both finally agreed to seal the tailed beast inside of both their sons. Hearing that he was about to be sealed away again, out of a pure fit of rage, Kurama broke the chains restraining him and swiped his hand at Minato and Kushina, attempting to kill them. However, he abruptly stopped, claws mere centimeters away from slicing through the Hokage and his wife. "Lord Hokage, Lady Kushina, are you both all right?" a familiar voice called out. It was Fugaku. "Yes, we're fine, thanks to you," Minato answered, his tone laced in gratefulness and relief. "I won't be able to keep the Kyuubi under my control for much longer. Please send for someone to seal it away." Fugaku spoke with urgency in his voice, blood already beginning to flow from his eyes because of the great strain of keeping the powerful beast under his control. "Before I take Kushina to the hospital, I have one request. Please seal half of the Kyuubi inside each of my sons." Fugaku and Hiruzen were about to question Minato's decision, but being Konoha's yellow flash, he was already gone. So they respected his wish and called for Riko Uzumaki, the best Fuinjutsu master in all the elemental nations, to seal the Kyuubi inside of the 2 infants. At that moment, Obito warped out of Kamui and hid in the shadows, looking for an opening to stop all this. But there was none. There were way too many shinobi around for him to just strike without a strategy, and he had no time to plan an attack because Riko was already weaving the hand seals. And so in the end, he did nothing. He just watched from the shadows as the formerly freed Biju got divided and sealed inside the 2 newborn boys while gritting his teeth, unable to stop the situation. It was all over. He had failed his task. The yin and yang halves of the Kyuubi were inside their new hosts and nothing could be done to reverse that. Reluctantly, Obito left the village, warping back to Madara's hideout empty-handed, readying himself to face the greatest punishment of his life for letting the Uchiha elder down. Having failed after giving Madara his word, Obito received a good scolding from the former clan head. "I'm not perfect, I failed too. Besides, this was a difficult task. How do you expect me, a 14-year-old with a newly acquired Mangekyo, to fight a Kage and control a Biju at the same time? Even after being trained by you, the time frame between when we started and when we finished was too small for me to improve enough to beat a literal Kage. No one can go from a black sheep to a prodigy in merely 6 months. Especially not me. I'm no prodigy. And I'm most definitely not you, Madara. So don't lug me in with you or expect me to do a job that you're supposed to yourself without screwing up at least once." Obito defended himself. Big mistake saying that last part. You're right, Obito. You're not me. Madara spoke in a tone that made Obito raise a brow. The Uchiha ghost walked towards the room where he kept all his weapons and battle items and stopped in front of his battle attire. He took the cloak off the hook, slipping it on before picking up a mask similar to the one Obito was wearing and walking towards the entrance. "Wait, what are you doing?" Obito asks in a nervous voice despite already knowing the answer. "You said it yourself. I shouldn't have let you do a job that I was supposed to do myself. Since you failed in bringing the Kyuubi back, I'm going to get the beast myself like I should have in the first place. And while I'm there, I'll give that former sensei of yours a visit he won't forget." Madara's voice was cold, so cold it made Obito shudder. The elder spared the adolescent no glance at all before shining to Konoha, leaving a nerve-wrecked Obito behind. Madara was a force of destruction, more dangerous than any of the Biju. There was no telling what he'd do in such a mood. Obito clenches his fists as a drop of sweat slips down the side of his face. "Kami, please stop him from doing anything too bad." Date: October 10th. Madara Pav. Obito screwed up the mission even after all the training I put him through. While I knew there was a bigger chance of him failing than succeeding, I could tell from that look in his eyes why exactly he failed. He still held an emotional connection to his comrades here in the Leaf. I guess I'll just have to get rid of those emotions of his then. I will shape him into the ideal subordinate no matter the cost. I mumble to myself as I sit in the shadows and wait for my opportunity to strike. Moments later I finally see my opportunity when Minato takes his sedated wife to bed and I shunshin into the baby room while he was occupied. In the crib lay 2 sleeping infants, one with blonde hair and one with scarlet hair. Due to the Kyuubi's sheer amount of hatred and negativity compared to the other Biju, his yin, shadow, half was bigger and stronger than the yang, light, half. I need the portion of Kyuubi with the greater chakra, so my gaze fixated on the red-haired boy. He possessed the yin half with the greater and darker chakra, so he would perfectly suffice. Having chose my target, I slowly lifted the blanket not to wake either of the two and carefully picked the baby up. Right on cue, my troublesome grandson flashed beside me with Tobirama's jutsu and attempted to impale me. I easily dodged the blade, grabbing his wrist with my free hand and teleported both of us to the top of the Hokage monument. He glared daggers at me, but behind his anger was the evident expression of concern for his son. "I mean you no harm, 4th Hokage, I just want to ask you a question. Answer it correctly, and I'll return your dear little son." He growled in a low tone as his grip on the kunai's handle tightened, a calculative look brimming from his cerulean eyes. As any parent would, he was attempting to devise a strategy to get his son back. All in vain though. "Make a move and you leave me no choice other than to kill him." Minato tenses up and I flared my Sharingan to show him my seriousness. "Will you give him back if I answer you?" Minato asked with concern in his voice, laced with hatred and distrust. "It all depends on your answer," I say in a monotone voice. He hesitated. "Fine, but before that, I have something to ask you," Minato said as his eyes still glowed with that same calculative look. I hummed in a questioning manner while my head sideways. "Your chakra signature and skill level as well as your mask and way of going about the situation are different than the man from before. Are you his partner? He's an observant one, I'll give him that. That subordinate of mine couldn't get the job done, so now I had to come along and clean up the mess for him." The youths of this era are so useless that good assistance is rather challenging to find these days. Things always end up in a bigger mess than if you were to do it yourself. Blame him for your son's life being in danger. Now, will you answer my question? I'll do anything to save my son, he said sternly. Anything? Well, let's test that out, shall we? I thought to myself as an evil smirk overtook my face behind the mask. There is one thing I should warn you about beforehand, Minato. His gaze darkened and I paused for a long while putting him on edge. If you can't answer me, I'll be forced to take drastic measures to get what I want. He grit his teeth, knuckles turning white as he clenched his fist. His nails dug into his palms drawing blood and I had to keep myself from laughing at the sight before me. How pathetic. As the Hokage you are to protect your village at all cost. However, as a father and a husband you are to protect your family. So let's say that both the village and your son were being threatened by someone far above Kage level and you could only save one of them. Which one would you choose? Choose your son and I will give him back in exchange for your position as Hokage. However, choose the village and I will leave Konoha forever but extract the Kyuubi from your son and end his life. After hearing my question and conditions he growled in frustration and tugged at his hair. As a father he wanted to save his son, but as Hokage it was his duty to save the village. But in this situation he could only make one choice. I could tell that it was tearing him apart. The conflicted look in his eyes made me laugh. Hearing my laughter he launched a stream of curses at me and after I grew tired of his ranting I removed my mask revealing my identity. I received the same reaction from him as everyone else. He froze and turned paper white with fear, his lips sealed shut. You don't have to answer the question right now, Minato. I'll give you as many opportunities as you want. I am practically immortal so I have all the time in the world. Every year on this exact day at the very same time I will be on this very spot waiting for you until midnight. Depending on your choice the brat either lives or dies. But in the meantime he will live with me. You can't do this, Madara. There's no way I'm letting you, he snapped defensively. And I do not care for your opinion, Minato. I will take good care of him while you figure out what to answer me. Regardless of how much you struggle, if you don't answer he is coming with me and that is final. Also, don't even think about telling your comrades or attacking me during these yearly visits because if you do I will destroy both this village and your little brat. I turned to leave and he called out to me. Madara. I stopped and turned around to face him. If Konoha is what you really want then you could easily just kill me and take it by force. So why are you doing all of this? He asks me. Because I simply want to know how big of a sacrifice you are willing to make as a Hokage to protect Konoha. After all, the shinobi system teaches you to protect what you love at all costs. I'm just testing whether you will stick to that faulty system or crack under the pressure and go against it for your own personal cause, as I did all those years ago. I answer. So you're doing all of this to see what I'll choose and nothing more? Why? What will you gain out of these mind games? What do you want? Upon answering that I desired peace, he started ranting about how my actions would only start a state of conflict instead of bring peace to the world. Indeed it would, but this is what needed to be done in order to achieve true peace. Minato, I want you to listen very carefully to what I am about to say, and consider the truth behind it. Not caring for his answer I spoke before he could respond immediately quoting the same words I said to Obito when we first met. The "wake up to reality" speech. There's no such thing as true peace. Not in a world like this where shinobi exist and follow a broken system. That is why I will destroy the system this world follows and change it into a better one. One that ensures everyone who follows it that they will have peace, love, and happiness with no fear of it all being stripped away by another who follows the same system. After that a moment of silence befell the area. Knowing that he now had nothing else to say I once again turned around and began walking away. Until we meet again. Third person POV. Madara body flickers away with the sleeping baby and Minato remained in the same spot, as he thought over what just happened. Madara. Plans to recreate the shinobi system? The situation would be bad enough if it were just that, but just the fact that he's after the Biju makes it a whole lot worse. This is very bad. I have to warn the other Kage about this. Obito POV. I paced around nervously while awaiting Madara's return. My palms were sweaty and my whole body was shaking slightly. My knees felt like jelly and my stomach twisted into a sickening knot. I was scared of what Madara might be doing to Sensei. Maybe I was wrong to join him. Maybe I should have just left and went back to Konoha. All of this felt like a big mistake. I tensed when I heard the sound of the body flicker jutsu by the entrance of the cave. Time seemed to slow down as Madara's footsteps grew louder and louder while he advanced toward me. His figure was hidden in the dimly lit room and all I could see were his glowing red eyes emitting a sharp gaze that felt as if he was staring straight through me. He was really angry. I swallowed the lump that had unknowingly formed in my throat and mustered up the courage to speak. So, what did you do? I asked, my voice shaky as nervousness washed over me like an ocean wave on the seashore. Do I really want to know the answer to that question? When he finally came out of the shadowy room and into the light, I realized what he had done. Instant panic struck me at the sight before me. You took the baby? Madara, are you out of your... I was cut off by his Sharingan burning a hole through my soul. His soulless orbs burned like a crimson inferno and his facial expression read, "Don't dare question my actions, useless brat." I could practically hear his voice echoing in the back of my head telling me those exact words, and all from an extremely detailed facial expression. Madara wasn't a person to defy nor mess with, so I remained silent and shrunk under his gaze as my eyes trailed to the floor, too terrified to make contact with his. This is my way of keeping Minato at my mercy. If you want to pressure an individual, take what they hold most precious to them and threaten it. It's common knowledge. I have taken his son and threatened the village. Minato is in a position where he has no option but to cooperate with me to save either one. Not that I care which one he chooses. I just want to see him suffer. Madara's voice was seething with hatred and anger with a slight tinge of disgust. All of which were aimed at Minato-sensei. Why does he hate sensei so much? I tensed once again as Madara spoke. Though he is the Kyuubi no Jinchuriki, I have no intention of extracting the beast from this boy just yet. Instead, I will use him to manipulate his father and keep him under my thumb. On top of all that, he could be a very useful tool otherwise. As a descendant of the Uzumaki bloodline, he will have a massive chakra reserve and be exceptionally skilled in Fuinjutsu. As a descendant of the Uchiha, he will have good control over the affinity of fire and he might even awaken a Sharingan. To top that all off, he is a Jinchuriki. The perfect weapon. And you, Obito, are in charge of him. What? I exclaim in utter disbelief. You heard me the first time. You're in charge of the brat. He forcefully handed me the baby and walked past without another word. He just waltzes into Konoha, takes the baby without involving me in the plan, and now suddenly I'm the one who is in charge of the kid. Me, a 14-year-old with no experience looking after kids whatsoever, is now a full-time caretaker to my sensei's kidnapped son? This felt wrong. I was completely uncomfortable with it. I didn't want this. I have no experience with kids whatsoever. I don't even know the first step to looking after one. How am I supposed to know if he's hungry or tired or bored or whatever? What am I supposed to do when he cries or gets sick or? Madara once again cuts me off, but this time with actual words and not a glare. Inject him with Zetsu cells. That way he won't get hungry and his immune system will become a lot stronger, so he won't get sick either. From there on, figure it out for yourself. Think of it as your punishment for failing me. Madara exits the room and goes to Rikudo knows where, leaving me alone with the newborn baby and a few Zetsu clones. I sigh through my nose before turning around and calling out to the last person I wanted to be with right now. Swirly, come with me. I need you for something. He skips over to me like a merry 5-year-old and follows me down the hall to where the bedrooms are located. I go inside the room next to mine and place the baby in the bed. What do you need me to do, Obito-san? Swirly asked in a high-pitched tone. I shushed him and he then repeated himself in a whisper that was still too high-pitched for my liking. Can you transfer some of your cells to him like you did with Rin? And then maybe watch him for a while? Where are you going? He asks in that same annoying whisper. I need to clear my head. I'll be back in an hour or two. I answer. Sure thing. I'll watch him for you. He speaks while giving me a thumbs up. I walk out of the room and close the door behind me. Through the closed door I hear him cooing at the baby, saying stuff like, "You're just so adorable." With conflicted emotions I walk down the hall and back to where I was before. I then enter the room next to the one where Madara keeps all his weapons, battle attire and regular spare clothing. It was a medical room. There lay Rin on one of the beds, completely motionless and still in a comatose. I take a seat on the chair next to her bed and think over all my decisions and what they have led up to. I began thinking about how unfair life is, how everyone just keeps suffering. How I just keep suffering. This world really is hell. Third person POV. After his encounter with Madara, Minato called for 5 Kage summit. All the other Kage agreed to meet Minato in Konoha and have the summit held there. The air was tense since it hasn't been long since the Third Ninja War and everyone was still skeptical of one another. Minato wasn't uneasy at all. Instead, he was concerned and panicked, indicating to the others that this situation was serious. However, the moment he said the words, "Madara Uchiha is alive," nobody believed him and all distrust was aimed his way. But the more Minato explained the situation, about the Nine Tails attack and his son being kidnapped, the more they considered it. Onoki, the Tsuchi Kage, knew Madara and what he looked like, so he asked Minato to describe him in as much detail as possible, from his appearance to his attitude and what he wanted. Minato went off to describe Madara's appearance as well as his attitude and personality. How he spoke and what he said and did down to the very last detail. He also says that he wants to recreate the world. And I have a feeling he is using the tailed beasts to do this. Minato ended off. The way you've described him perfectly matches exactly how I remember Madara. It's identical. You cannot describe these specific details if you have not personally encountered him, Onoki spoke. He believed Minato. Do not be so quick to accept his words as the truth, Tsuchikage. The Raikage interjected. Anyone could describe Madara based on limited information. Especially somebody from Konoha. All of the shinobi world knows about him and can describe him based on intel in history books alone. It wouldn't be impossible for the Hokage to have even more details about Madara that we do not know about, since the bastard Uchiha was originally from this village. The Kage were divided between believing Minato and standing against him. They were not convinced that after all these years Madara could still be alive. Seeing their skeptical expressions and the slight glimmer of distrust in their eyes, Minato spoke up again, desperate to convince them. Listen everyone, I understand that none of us really trust one another. Especially so soon after the Third Great Ninja War. But why would I lie about something like this? About my son being kidnapped and my village being threatened by a foe that we cannot stop alone? I know that Madara still being alive is difficult if not impossible to believe. But it's the truth. We are all in danger. Minato says with urgency in his voice. Just as I was about to argue against Minato's statement again, one of the walls breaks and crumbles as the now lifeless body of a shinobi was sent crashing straight through it. Everyone jumped up from their seats, their guards raised and their eyes on high alert, all looking in the direction of the destroyed wall. Each of the Kage's guards stuck close to them, their weapons in hand and in a fighting stance, ready to face whoever it was that interrupted the summit. The Hokage is correct, you know. You are all in great danger. A deep masculine voice spoke with amusement as the shadowy figure of its owner appeared, advancing toward them through the thick cloud of dust and debris from the broken wall. Recognizing the voice, Minato froze in place, his eyes widened and his heart pounding as a sense of fear washed over him. And yet despite this fear he clenched his fist and grit his teeth in rage. Madara chuckled as he stepped through the cloud of dust, a mocking smirk plastered on his features as he enjoyed Minato's emotional reaction. But then, his crimson orbs fell onto someone who he hadn't seen in a long time. Well, if it isn't the Iwagakure fence sitter. I almost didn't recognize you, Onoki. You've grown quite old. Madara, you really are still alive. Onoki stuttered, his voice unsure and quivering slightly. Indeed, I may have died after my battle with Hashirama, but I have my ways of returning to this accursed world. He said with a smug smirk, his eyes glowing with mockery. He then diverted his gaze and walked over towards the table they were all gathered around. This 5 Kage summit is quite convenience for me. It means I don't have to go to each individual village to get my message across to the 5 of you. He says as he just casually takes a seat in one of the chairs, perfectly relaxed and rubbing the fact that he didn't fear them in their faces. I will use Minato's situation as an example of what's to come. He trailed off and paused for a few seconds, just to enjoy the tension in the room. I will take those who you hold dearest to you and destroy them along with your dear villages if you deny me what I ask for. It was then that the rest of the Kage realized the severity of the situation. You wouldn't dare? I shouts out of frustration. Madara scoffs. I already have the perfect targets in mind for each of you. Onoki, you recently adopted a little brat named Deidara. 4th Raikage, I know your younger brother's location and weaknesses. 4th Mizukage Yagura, you are a Jinchuriki and I can extract your Biju right this second if I so wish. 4th Kage Rasa, you have the most to lose since you have a son and a daughter and a pregnant wife. And finally Minato, well, I already have your son but I guess I could kill the other one. Minato grits his teeth and curses Madara. Just then a couple of members from Uchiha police force enter the room to defend the 5 Kage. Among them was Fugaku the Uchiha clan head and Minato's best friend. Minato immediately warned them not to advance since it was obvious Madara would easily kill them. Suddenly Raiden flashes beside Minato with the flying Raiden jutsu, worried about his son's safety after hearing that the guards were all killed. He immediately froze when seeing Madara in front of him but more out of surprise rather than fear. Madara stared him down with a sharp gaze making Raiden especially nervous. His Sharingan was glowing more brightly and intensely than before, filled with a great amount of anger and resentment. After all these years the disappointment of a lifetime finally sticks his cowardly little head out. Having fun sucking up to Hashirama's defective rules, Raiden you traitor? It was no secret among the Uchiha clan that Raiden had ties with Madara some years ago. It was the reason he was an outlast from the clan. Minato however had no clue of the relationship between his father and the Uchiha elder. You're back, Raiden stuttered. Madara smacked his lips and got up from his seat. I've said what needed to be said. I'm done with you Kage. However, Madara trailed off and glanced towards Fugaku. Then in the blink of an eye pulled a kunai from his ninja pouch and teleported in front of Fugaku to attack him. Raiden being the only living Uchiha besides Madara with an eternal Mangekyo was able to predict his movements and cast his Ranten, Rakurai Nagashi, Storm Release, Thunderbolt Stream, Jutsu to separate Madara from Fugaku. To not get struck by the powerful stream of lightning, Madara jumped backward, putting space between himself and the stream of thunderbolts. Using the very jutsu that I helped you create against me, Madara asked, his voice dripping with disdain. He pocketed the kunai and raised his head to glare at Raiden. His eyes burning with an even more intense anger than before. The audacity you have. I'm surprised you even had the courage to weave a single hand sign. You've become rather confident, Raiden. I'll give you that. But you are still the same naive brat you were all that time ago. If you think you can ever escape me then prepare to be proven wrong. I will always haunt you. Without another word Madara body flickers away. The atmosphere was thick and everyone was tense, some still in disbelief. Raiden was especially tense, his hands shaking slightly and his breathing uneven. After calming everyone down and making sure Madara was gone, the summit continued with the cage being protected by extra guards now. Having seen the threat with their own eyes, they believed Minato and finally began discussing the problem. After the summit, all of the villages were on high alert for Madara, and Minato never stopped looking for his son. Meanwhile, Madara watched both Minato and Raiden from the shadows, a smirk plastered on his face as he gained satisfaction from their panicked state. Obito Pav. Ever since Madara brought the baby to the hideout I have avoided the infant only going to him when it was absolutely necessary. Further on, Swirly was his babysitter which I was very thankful for. It meant that not only did I not have to look after the baby, I also got a break from Swirly since he was almost always occupied. That was pretty much the only good that came out of it. Everything else was hell for me. The guilt and conflicted emotions was too much for me and I began getting depressed. Madara was obviously of no help at all as he always kept belittling me and calling me useless. I got no new tasks from High as he preferred to do everything himself since he didn't trust me not to screw anything up. I was just lying in my room most of the time and since my room was next to the baby's I constantly heard Swirly cooing and giggling, being as happy as he could be. But today it was quiet. Surprisingly quiet. A bit concerned, I dragged myself to the room next door to see what was happening. It was empty. I heard Swirly's voice coming from down the hall so I followed just to make sure the baby was okay. There I found Swirly along with Shiroi and Kuro around the baby. Swirly was silently cooing at the boy who was sitting upright, half asleep while sucking his finger. His head would bob up and down as he slipped in and out of his sleeping state. He was tired but didn't want to sleep and Swirly was internally squealing because of this. You're absolutely adorable, Swirly whispered evidently holding back a squeal, like some kind of lovesick middle school girl. So good for cuddles, Shiroi added, and Kuro just let out a monotonous grunt. Madara was there too. He was reading but would glance at them every so often, keeping an eye on them all. What do you find so fascinating about him? He's just a baby, I asked in a plain, slightly bored tone of voice. It's exactly because he's a baby that I love him so much. I've never seen a baby before, so I really love being this close to him. Swirly answers me while he kept his eyes dead set on the infant. I get it, okay. It's your first time with a baby. But still, you don't have to be so overly excited about everything. Like seriously, it's annoying. Swirly just giggles in his childlike tone, completely ignoring me, and my eyebrow twitches in irritation as I look away and try not to acknowledge any of this. Hey Obito, I think he likes you, Shiroi points out. I reluctantly look back at the mini makeshift bed and see the baby looking at me. His innocent big blue eyes wide awake and almost unblinking. He was fixated on me, holding his arms out and whining. He wants you to pick him up. Kuro suddenly chimes in. No way, I say monotonously with my arms crossed over my chest, and I was about to turn away again when Madara spoke in a deep and commanding tone. Obito, when I brought him here I thought I had made it clear that he was your responsibility. I knew better than to backchat with him, so I kept my lips sealed and he continued to speak. You have let Swirly raise him these past few months, avoiding the punishment I gave you for your failure, but it ends now. Under my order he is now yours to look after full time with no assistance from any of the Zetsu clones. Now, pick him up and stop forcing your responsibility onto everyone else in this base. After a few seconds of hesitation, my fear of Madara got the better of me. I finally and very reluctantly picked the curious little infant up. The little boy grabbed onto my shirt, holding it tightly, and babbled happily in my arms. I was still uncomfortable, but Madara was satisfied. And stop referring to him as the baby. Give him a name for Rikudo's sake. Before Swirly comes up with something absolutely ridiculous and the kid actually starts responding to it, Madara ordered while sitting comfortably on his throne as he read a book while siphoning a portion of chakra from the Gedo Mazo behind him. As I thought about a name for the boy while looking into his innocent deep blue eyes, the memory of the day that I watched Kushina and Sensei during the gathering they held at dinnertime before I released the Kyuubi popped into my mind. Flashback no jutsu. Kushina hummed, placing a finger on her chin. I haven't quite thought about that yet. But I want his name to be fire-related. Why? You want his name to be intimidating like your nickname, Red Hot Habanero? Kakashi asked playfully, earning a few laughs and giggles from everyone. Even a short chuckle from Obito, who was listening in from halfway inside his Kamui dimension. He strongly disliked Kakashi, but that doesn't mean his joke wasn't funny enough to laugh at. No, actually, I want to name him that because fire was Obito's affinity. Flashback no jutsu, Kai. My stomach was back to being a tangled up knot and my whole body was tense yet again. I spaced out for a moment while a sledgehammer of emotions hit me all at once. But I forced myself through it and subconsciously said the first fire-related name that crossed my mind. Kazan. Madara hummed. I guess you're not all that useless. That is actually a good name. Perfectly fit for an Uchiha. But he's not an Uchiha. Shiroi spoke, taking the words straight out my mouth. He is now, said Madara as he severed the root from the Gedo Mazo. Neither I nor Shiroi questioned Madara despite wanting to. Swirly, of course, being the impulsive idiot he was, just blurted out the question we were all thinking. But why Uchiha? His father's last name is Namikaze and his mother's is of the Uzumaki bloodline. Why give him your last name, Madara-sama? Swirly asked curiously but confused more than anything else. 2 reasons. Firstly is just to spite Minato, and secondly, because just like Obito, Kazan is my great-grandson. That one took me by complete surprise. I knew that Sensei's father was an Uchiha and an outcast from the clan, but I never suspected that he was actually Madara's son. So, if my grandfather and Raiden-sama are brothers, Sensei and my father would be cousins. That means not only is Minato-sensei my uncle, Kazan and Naruto are my second cousins. I muttered to myself aloud. Madara heard what I said and confirmed it nonchalantly before just walking away. In this moment, my stomach became even more uneasy, and my mind clouded with hundreds of racing thoughts, the storm of emotions inside my heart growing wilder. I was thrown back into my state of denial and went back to doubting my decisions. I snapped back to reality when I felt a tug on my shirt and looked down to see Kazan holding a handful of it while looking me dead in the eye. The longer I stared at him, the more he looked like Sensei. His eyes, though they were a darker shade of blue, were exactly like his. That warm, loving and concerned look that brimmed from Sensei's eyes. That aura around him that warmed my heart and drew me closer to him, making me view him as family. All those same feelings I had with Minato sensei I started feeling towards Kazan in that brief moment and every other moment there on out. It was a torturous hell for me. Why me? Would my suffering never end? It's been 6 months since Madara made me look after Kazan full time. The hellish feeling inside of my heart never went away, and my mind was constantly clouded by thoughts of regret and old memories. It was depressing. It didn't help my situation that as soon as Kazan started to talk he called me Aniki, big brother, because of Swirly encouraging him to do so. I was tense and depressed every single day, not even getting a moment to relax. Even when I was asleep my regret and denial haunted me in my dreams, and this inner conflict with my emotions went on for a long time until a few weeks after Kazan's first birthday. Zetsu came up to me and Shiroi asked me why I was being so tense and distant. Because I am looking after my sensei's kidnapped son. It doesn't help at all that Minato actually turned out to be my uncle. It's all too emotional for me. You're not a human so you wouldn't understand. I was hoping they would leave me alone after that but they didn't. This time Kuro Zetsu spoke. I get that, but it seems to me like you were avoiding the brat for a different reason, Obito. I tried to deny it and play it off like he was wrong but he persisted. I can see straight through your lies, brat. You're angry at Minato and you're taking it out on Kazan by avoiding him. But just because your precious sensei didn't show up in time to save you and your little crush doesn't mean you have to redirect those emotions at his son. It is a childish form of behavior you know, to play a blaming game and shift the consequences of someone else's shortcomings onto a person who wasn't even involved in the first place. If you have any reason other than that for keeping your distance and being so tense around Kazan then name it and I will stop pressuring you. I opened my mouth to speak but nothing came out. Not a single excuse came to mind. Honestly, I couldn't answer either of them nor could I argue against the point Kuro had made, and soon enough I began to ask myself that same question ever since. Kuro was right. I am taking it out on him. And as soon as realization struck, guilt followed. My issue is with sensei. Not with his son. Kazan has nothing to do with what happened in the past. With what happened to Rin and I, so why am I treating him like he was involved in it? After this, I stopped avoiding him and actually looked after him properly like Madara told me to. It was difficult for the first few weeks but as more time passed, I actually started to like taking care of him. After getting over my issues and spending more time with him I found out why Swirly and the other white Zetsu clones liked him so much. He was really cute. He had a certain effect on everyone around him that just made them calmer and more pleasant, and it didn't take long for it to set in with me. On top of that he was really smart too, and a quick learner. A bit mischievous sometimes too. I could tell that he understood full sentences when I either spoke to him or someone else around him. Sure they were simple sentences but they were still full ones nonetheless. This sometimes caused problems, but not major ones. Since he understood us, we needed to use code words when speaking about certain things around him like activities he hated or others that excited him too much. But he soon figured out what the code words meant and even all the replacements we came up with too. It was impressive, but still troublesome, and although I took a certain sense of pride in his almost abnormally advanced learning abilities and some of the stuff I taught him, he was a challenge to care for and often needed discipline from Madara. Speaking of which, after I began taking care of Kazan like I was told to, Madara actually started giving me things to do again besides permanently babysitting. I guess that keeping me off missions and cooped up inside was Madara's form of punishment for me for not doing what he ordered me to, and when I finally did I was allowed more freedom and missions. Time skip. Date: August 28. Madara Pav. Since Obito was doing more of the tasks that I used to complete myself, I now had more free time on my hands, and I used this time to do more research about the Sage of the Six Paths and all the records he had left behind. I sat in library with a pile of scripted records and other writings like usual, but as of late, Kazan has become curious and started asking me what I was doing. When I told him that I was reading, the curious 3-year-old began asking questions. Pointing to kanji asking which was which and what the books and scrolls said. That was how I indirectly taught him how to distinguish different kanji from one another, and from there on he somehow learned to read a paragraph or two out of books I put aside. I was impressed by this, to say the least. The boy barely stuttered and only needed to hear the meaning of the kanji once before memorizing it perfectly, and it took only 2 months for him to become fluent in reading without any assistance. As I watched him, a smirk played on my lips. Seems as though I had unknowingly acquired a genius as a new subordinate. He could be of even greater use to me than I originally planned. I had previously only thought of him as a tool to manipulate his father, but now, having realized his potential, I grew greatly interested in him and started interacting with him more. I kept watching him closely and found that he had grown intrigued by books about jutsu, chakra control, and even some on strategic thinking. To test his skills and get a rough estimate on his strategic capabilities, I asked him questions that would need detailed strategies, and surprisingly, he gave even higher level and more detailed answers than I expected. This made me start to wonder about how smart he actually was, and Kuro Zetsu suggested an IQ test, so without hesitation I had him take one. Despite being 3 years old, he had the mental capacity of a 12-year-old with an IQ of 56 compared to a 3-year-old's 5 to 10 points. He had great potential, a real prodigy, and soon he would be a useful subordinate to have around for the completion of Project Tasuki no Mi. Third person POV. Date: June 29. After learning to read, Kazan began getting curious about chakra and jutsu. So Madara had Obito teach him basic exercises for mastering chakra control. Like the exercise of keeping a leaf perfectly stuck on your forehead using only chakra. Once he had mastered that, he began the tree climbing exercise, then the walking on water exercise. After he had mastered all of those, Obito taught him the fireball jutsu. Being a prodigy, Kazan caught on pretty quickly, and having Uchiha genes, he had great control over the element of fire. Mastering the fireball jutsu only took him 2 tries. He had even surpassed the size of Obito's fireball on his 4th attempt. Obito decided to test Kazan's affinities with chakra paper to see what elements he had and if he could teach him to use them. When infusing chakra into the paper, what happens to it afterwards says what affinity you have. Wind. It tears into 2. Water. It becomes damp. Fire. It burns into ash. Lightning. It crumples up. Earth. It crumbles away. When Kazan infused his chakra into the paper, it tore into 4 equal pieces. One piece burned to ash, another crumbled away, one became damp, and the last one crumpled up. He had all 5 chakra natures. Obito trained him in fire style and earth style, and Madara trained him in lightning style and further trained him in fire style. Of all his affinities, Kazan had the most mastery of fire, and right behind that was lightning. He wanted to train with his other affinities too, but since neither wind or water were a natural affinity to Obito and Madara, they couldn't teach him much. However, Obito had 2 people in mind who were perfect for the job. I sat in a chair across from Obito in the dark room, listening closely as he explained everything. What he wanted me to do was quite off-putting considering how Kazan and I were related and the connection I had with both his parents and godfather. I was completely against it. So, what do you think? Will you do it? Obito asked me as he ended off. You want me to train a child? The Hokage's son whom you and Madara kidnapped? I emphasized the last part. I know this stirs up a lot of bad emotions. Believe me, I know. Minato was my sensei after all. Not only that, but he's my uncle too. Raising Kazan has been an emotional hell, but I've overcome that and learned to see it from a more optimistic perspective. Just give it a try. I sat forward in my chair and looked him dead in the eye. Was that your idea of a pep talk, Obito? How is that supposed to help me? I already told you that I don't want to get involved in the dirty work of Project Tasuki no Mi. Let alone this kind of work. I'm only saying this once. My answer is no, I tell him sternly. He scratches the back of his head nervously in response to my answer. About that, he trailed off while looking away. My eyes narrowed down on him. What? I asked, annoyed. He hesitated but eventually answered. I kind of told Madara that I was going to ask you. He seemed to like the idea too, so if you want to back out, you're gonna have to take it up with him. I paused for a moment. Processing his words, my gaze went from stern to a threatening glare. Great. Just great. Madara expects me to train Kazan now. If I say no, that means I'm going against whatever he has planned in the future. If I do that, then he'll destroy my village. I grit my teeth and clench my fists before sighing in defeat. I had no choice now. If Madara knows, then saying no would not only be suicide, but it'll cause unnecessary chaos for the village too. That's something we definitely don't need right now. We're already in the middle of a rebellion against Hanzo. So fine. I don't want to, but I will. He thanked me as if I was doing this at will. I smacked my lips as I kept my sharp gaze on him. He seemed slightly nervous by this but not scared. Oh, and one more thing. He trailed off again. I was just frustrated at this point. Spit it out, Uchiha. That friend of yours knows water style, right? My gaze grew even sharper. I knew where he was going with this. I got up and slammed my hands on the table between us. That wasn't the deal. You said you wouldn't get them involved in this mess. I sternly reminded him. Suddenly a deep voice cut through the air. I said I wouldn't get them involved in the hunt for the Biju. I never said anything about using them to help out with smaller, more distantly related tasks. Do you have a problem with that, Uzumaki? I turned my head to make contact with his singular visible Sharingan cutting into me like a dagger. As much as I wanted to yell, I watched my tongue. I clenched my fist slightly. Eventually I lowered my head and avoided eye contact. I couldn't handle his piercing gaze anymore. No Madara-sama. HN. Good. Obito will tell Kazan about having 2 new teachers to help with his untrained affinities. If he complies with it, prepare to begin training him. The first session will start 2 days from now, when Obito and I will be out on missions for the week. Kazan will stay with you for about 5 days under the supervision of a few white Zetsu clones. Be ready or I'll cut both yours and your friends' lives short. And I guarantee you, it won't be quick and painless. His voice was filled with seriousness and laced in malice. It was sharp as a sword and icy cold, almost making me shiver. Yes, sir. I understand. His glare softened slightly, but his expression remained a stone-cold poker face and he walked away. Obito stayed seated in the chair across from mine and I shot him a glare as he tried apologizing. I know he doesn't really want to be in this mess either, but I still strongly dislike him. Especially now that he dragged my comrades into this. The next day, September 13th, third-person POV, a new sensei? Kazan asked as he tilted his head. 2 new senseis actually. 1 to train you in water style and 1 to train you in wind style. You and Swirly will stay with them for a few days while Madara and I complete a few tasks in a different nation. You alright with that, kiddo? Obito asked him. Kazan then asked the question that first came to his mind when Obito mentioned a new teacher. Will I still train with you and Oji-san? Because if not, then I don't want to do it. Obito saw the slight disappointment and worry in his eyes. He was serious. The young Uchiha's expression softened and he smiled slightly in a comforting manner as he knelt down to the boy's level. Of course you will. It's not like you'll be training with them every day. You can still train with us while you're here at the hideout. Obito reassures him. Kazan thinks about it and reluctantly agrees to it. Obito then ruffles his hair, to which Kazan pouts while shooting him an annoyed glare and playfully swatting the Uchiha's hand from his head, causing him to chuckle. We're leaving tomorrow morning at 6. So don't overwork yourself with physical training today, and make sure to get enough sleep too. The next day, September 14th, Kazan was really curious about who his senseis would be. All he knew was that 1 would train him in wind style and 1 in water style. Further on he knew absolutely nothing. Not where they were from or what clans they were descendant from. Not even their names. Obito wouldn't say anything, nor would the Zetsu clones, and Madara had already left by the time Kazan woke up, so the boy couldn't even ask him. The suspense was really annoying him. His eyebrow was twitching constantly as he stared intensely at Obito, trying to get him to crack. But his attempts were unsuccessful. The Uchiha remained silent and Kazan was only able to get the answers he wanted when Obito finally took him to the mysterious duo. Kazan POV. They were definitely not what I was expecting. For one, they were way younger than how I pictured them based on Aniki's vivid descriptions. The first was a boy in his late teens who seemed to be a bit obnoxious judging from his childlike grin and enthusiastic aura. He was like a human version of Swirly. The second boy looked to be the same age as the first. He wasn't enthusiastic to say the least, in fact he looked quite tired and annoyed. His aura was rather grim and his face and body language was screaming, "I don't want to be here at all." He reminds me of Aniki when Oji-san gives him a task he doesn't like. This seemed like it was going to be rather annoying, but not to the point where I couldn't put up with it for 5 days. After all, staying with them would help me master my affinities. No reward comes without effort and sacrifice, I guess. Good grief, I mutter under my breath. Both Oji-san and Aniki were in a meeting with one of their peers in another nation, and I was alone in the base with Swirly and a couple dozen Shiroi Zetsu clones. Since I had nothing better to do, I kept myself entertained by doing some training. First I worked on my physical training, doing various exercises to increase my stamina, endurance and agility, etc. Then I worked on my ninjutsu, taijutsu, and genjutsu, as well as my skill in weaponry. Finally I did some mental exercises, like working on various puzzles and quizzes to test the limits of my mental capacity, and when all that was done I started meditating. Everything was going smoothly for a few minutes until I sensed Shiroi and Kuro Zetsu's chakra signature appear. The moment it did, I almost instantly had an uneasy feeling in the pit of my stomach, like my insides were being corrupted. Just like a few months ago when I was with Aniki at Orochimaru's hideout. From what I remember, Orochimaru said that it was because the Kyuubi was leaking a surge of negative emotions, and that because of our link through the seal I could sense what he was feeling. All he said was that it wasn't uncommon for Jinchuriki to sometimes even pass out from the severity of the negativity their beasts were leaking, and that the only solution was to put the beast under a Sharingan genjutsu. But the only problem with me was that the kind of seal Riko Uzumaki used to confine the Kyuubi inside me was specially created by her to resist even the Mangekyo Sharingan, and that it could only be altered by the Jutsu caster or the Jinchuriki themselves. I remained silent for a few seconds, just thinking everything over. I had long ago discovered that the Kyuubi only leaked killer intent and hatred whenever the original Zetsu was nearby. The Nine Tails was rather calm whenever one of Shiroi's clones were close to me, but whenever Kuro was in a detectable radius around me is when Kyuubi would start getting riled up and restless. I can't say that I blame him though. Everything about Kuro Zetsu was just so off-putting. I got the feeling that he was constantly lying, just deceiving Aniki and Oji-san. Either being withholding or bending the truth, but never being honest. And with Kyuubi leaking so much malice toward him, that might just be proof that my bad hunch about Kuro might be right. Since I was meditating in any event, I cleared my mind and focused even harder, causing me to enter into my mindscape. A dimly lit hallway that stretched on before me with many rooms on either side, and dripping pipes above, a pool of water on the floor reaching up till my ankles. I walked down the long hallway, hearing the low growls of the Kyuubi grow louder and louder as I reached the end of the hallway and walked into the room where he was confined. Upon arriving there I was greeted by his usual piercing gaze as he lifted his head from his crossed arms and sat upright on his haunches, baring his giant sharp fangs at me. I didn't back down though, and my expression never faltered. Instead I walked towards the gate, stopping just short of his reach, and sat down in front of him, just silently holding eye contact for a moment before speaking. They say that an animal's senses are more acute than that of a human's. You're a fox, Kyuubi, and you harbor a lot of distrust and hatred towards Kuro Zetsu. Does that insinuate something? Do you know something that we don't? Obviously I didn't receive an answer from him, but his growling decreased slightly. Seeing him ease up a bit, I decided to keep speaking. You know, for a long while now I've had a hunch that Kuro is untrustworthy. And you know this as well, am I wrong? His expression faltered and I saw a glimmer of something in his eyes. That alone was proof enough for me that our opinions on Kuro Zetsu were similar if not the same. It wasn't much, but at least I had that to work with. I'm just thinking out loud here, but in my opinion Kuro is not the will of Madara, like he claims to be. After all, you seem to have a history with him, one separate from any history with Madara. I can see it in your eyes and feel it from the different mix of emotions and amount of hatred you harbor toward them both. They're unequal. Your emotions toward each or the other are unrelated, pushing me to believe that your encounters were as well. Kuro did something to you. Something worse than Madara. A glimmer of surprise flashed through his eyes, but he quickly hid it away behind a sharp stare. Not fast enough for me not to pick up on it though. I was right. I closed my eyes and started thinking out loud again. If Kuro Zetsu isn't Ojiisan's, well then who or what is he? More importantly, what interest could he have in Project Tasuki no Mi, and how will casting the genjutsu benefit him? What does he even want? Whatever it is, it's definitely something more than just to have a whole planet under the effects of a global genjutsu. I then opened my eyes and stared at my reflection in the water as I muttered to myself. He needs to be stopped. Preferably before any of the Biju are captured. Kyuubi's ears perked up when he heard me say this. His face also expressing a mix of surprise and confusion. He knew I held no hostility or hatred toward him, but he most likely only brushed it off as me being a clueless child, which wasn't true. In reality, while I was mostly indifferent toward him, I actually liked the Kyuubi. His company was definitely a lot better than that of a bunch of white Zetsu clones. And beside that, just the thought of the Biju being powerful beings created by the Rikudo Sennin himself was rather fascinating to me. I found the Kyuubi interesting as an individual, and while I never met any other Biju before, they definitely intrigued me as well. Third-person POV. Kazan spent a lot of his free time in his Mindscape with the nine-tailed fox. He sat there, talking about what he thought and how he felt because he couldn't speak to anyone else about it. If anyone knew that he had no interest in joining the mission to complete Project Tasuki no Mi, he would be severely punished, no doubt. He had no proof that Kuro was the enemy. So he vented all his thoughts and emotions to Kurama. This has been going on for 5 months now, and Kurama was starting to feel a small but strong connection between himself and Kazan. And not just because he was sealed inside of him. Every time that Kurama had this feeling, his mind would go back to thousands of years ago when Hagoromo prophesied that an unnamed shinobi with a Kekkei Genkei and Biju chakra would become the new Rikudo Sennin. But for some reason his mind also fell on Hagoromo's final vision. One about how a reincarnation of Indra would one day achieve great power and change the deceased Otsutsuki's fate of being cast into the void by the celestial siblings. And it was because of these two memories that the Kyuubi entirely stopped aiming hatred towards his vessel. For if Kazan were truly the shinobi spoken of in either of the two prophecies, then he had to maintain a good relationship with this boy to make sure he wouldn't go astray. It was Hagoromo's final wish that the two chosen ones be protected, so Kurama would do his best to fulfill the final wish of his father figure. There was a long moment of silence in the psyche plane as Kurama's memories and conflicted emotions revolving around Hagoromo's death hit him full force. Sensing the inner conflict of emotions Kurama was having, Kazan looked at him expressing concern. Although rather nonchalant, his deep blue eyes were genuine and the scene before him made old memories of Kurama resurface. Memories of Hagoromo, Ashura and Indra. And the fact that Kazan shared many similarities with the three. Kurama POV. This boy. He definitely is different from all the other humans and Jinchuriki I've met. Maybe he really is the one Hagoromo-sama was talking about. I'll have to keep a close eye on him to make sure that bastard Kuro doesn't get to him too, like he did to Ashura and Indra. Kazan POV. After a quick introduction and asking me if I was still alright with this, Aniki left using his kamui. I was now alone with my two new teachers if you exclude Swirly, who was underground with about 2 or 3 other Zetsu clones. The first was a boy in his late teens who had spiky unkempt ginger hair. His brown eyes were just gleaming with enthusiasm and he wore a cheeky grin on his face. His aura was one of pure friendliness and warmth. He also seemed to be a bit obnoxious. Like a human version of Swirly. The second boy looked to be the same age as the first. He had long silky red hair that flowed over half his face reaching his shoulders. His singular visible eye, a Rinnegan to my surprise, was clouded with conflicted emotions and his aura was rather grim and screaming. I don't want to be here at all. He reminds me of Aniki when he's in a depressed mood. Rather annoying but not to the point where I couldn't put up with it for 5 days. Good grief, I mutter under my breath. The ginger-haired boy introduced himself as Yahiko and his red-haired friend was named Nagato. His last name stuck out to me. Uzumaki. It was the same as my mother's. I didn't jump to conclusions just because they had the same last name. I know that a couple Uzumaki survived their home village's destruction, so him knowing my mother might be a long shot. However, later that day, Yahiko, being curious as well as trying to make small talk, asked me a couple of questions. Questions you ask any average 4-year-old, like what they like, what they dislike, how they spend their time and if they had siblings. It was in that way that I told Yahiko why I was with Obito, or rather Tobi as they call him. I don't know much about my parents. All I know is that my mother is an Uzumaki and my father is half Uchiha. Tobi is actually my cousin, but I call him Aniki because he's the one who raised me and I think of him as a brother more than a cousin. I didn't go into a lot of detail about anything, playing the act of a regular 4-year-old. In fact, I purposefully left out crucial pieces of information so it wasn't obvious I was the fourth Hokage's missing son. I made sure that it was not obvious I was leaving something out, meanwhile also keeping an eye on Nagato's reaction as I was getting a hunch he was hiding something. Upon mentioning my mother was from the same clan as him, I saw Nagato tense up. It was barely visible, but having sharp vision thanks to my Uchiha genes, I noticed it clearly. From then on I kept a closer eye on him. I would get him go crack and I'd do it before Oji-san and Aniki came back from their mission. Third person Pav. The first day Kazan was there, most of his time was spent chatting away with Yahiko, who was making conversation to get the boy to feel more comfortable before starting training. Konan, who had just arrived from patrolling the borders and completing a few D-rank missions, also joined the conversation. Nagato was still distant. He was tense and on edge. Mostly out of guilt. Indeed, he wanted to get to know Kazan better, but it felt wrong to cooperate with Madara's plans like this. It frustrated him. When the clock struck 10, they decided it was time to start training. After going outside, Nagato used Almighty Push to massacre the clouds to stop the rainfall, giving them clear skies. Kazan was impressed by the jutsu, and after the skies were all cleared, Yahiko asked him what he knew about chakra. Kazan explained everything he knew and Yahiko then asked for a demonstration of his chakra control. First was keeping a leaf on his forehead, then the tree climbing exercise, and finally walking on water. After doing all 3 exercises perfectly and without flaw, Nagato speaks for the first time and asked him to do something. Toby tells me you've been practicing a few basic jutsu. What can you do so far? Nagato asks him. Hearing Nagato say the word basic, Kazan knew Obito didn't tell the Uzumaki about his real power and skill level. It was a message to Kazan not to use his full power yet, as Madara didn't want him revealing anything to anybody about his real strength. So Kazan went along with it and only listed the 3 most basic jutsu he knew, not speaking a word about any of the others. I can do Doden, Doryuheki, Earth Release, Mudwall, Raiden, Raiko Boruto, Lightning Release, Lightning Bolt, and Kaden, Gokakyu, Fire Release, Fireball. Kazan answers. Please give a demonstration of each one so we can know exactly what we're working with and how much skill you have. After performing all 3 jutsu to the exact same level that a low-level genin would, holding back most of his skill and progress, Kazan asked to work on his water release first. At that, Yahiko stepped forward and began teaching him the hand seals after demonstrating the jutsu beforehand. Still hiding his skill level, Kazan purposefully took a lot longer to do the Suiten, Teppo Dama, water release, liquid bullet, at the same level as Yahiko. 7 attempts to be exact, which was 4 more than what he actually required to master the jutsu. His progress stunned the trio of aim nin to say the least. While Yahiko sulked, muttering something along the lines of, "It took me years to perfect that jutsu," Nagato began teaching Kazan how to use wind release in combat to boost his speed. Needless to say, by the end of the 3-hour training session, Kazan was able to run even faster than Nagato. Kazan dodged Nagato's every attack with ease and even went so far as to manifest wind into the palm of his hand and use it to successfully blow Nagato away a couple feet. "I thought you didn't know any wind release jutsu," said Nagato as he dusted himself off. "I don't. I just tried channeling the wind into my hand instead of my feet and use it to knock you away like with a chakra-infused punch." Kazan replies, "Well, you learned 3 new jutsu in just 1 day. I think that's more than enough training for now. We'll teach you more tomorrow." Later that night, Kazan Pav. I was in the guest bedroom lying on my bed staring at the ceiling. I knew Swirly was inside the wall at the foot of my bed, so I told him to come out. "It took you a lot longer than it should have to master those jutsu. Why hold back?" he asked me. "Because Oji-san doesn't fully trust them enough to let them know my real skill level. They don't even know about Project Tasuki no Mi. He's taking precautions not to get caught, so I'm just making sure not to mess up and foil any of his plans." I answer him, "Oh, okay then." I then shoo him away as it was 11 p.m. and his high-pitched voice would wake the others. He sang a good night in an annoying whisper, if you can even call it that, and melted back into the wall. Finally alone, I lied back down and slipped off into the world of sleep. Third person POV. Kazan's second training session with Nagato and Yahiko started at 8 a.m. Before they taught him any new jutsu, they worked on physical training. After a few different exercises, they reviewed the 3 jutsu from the previous day before taking a small break. After the break, both older boys taught him a total of 2 jutsu each, having 30-minute breaks after every jutsu he mastered. So for the whole day on his second day there, Kazan learned 4 new jutsu, 2 water style and 2 wind style. To be honest, he genuinely enjoyed staying in the village hidden in the rain. He started taking a liking to Yahiko, Nagato and Konan too. Even though Nagato was still distant and on edge, Kazan was able to spend time with him and get to know him. This night in particular, Yahiko was sound asleep snoring away on the couch while Konan was in her room upstairs. Kazan was alone with Nagato and saw this as his opportunity. While also being a genuinely curious toddler, he asked Nagato a bunch of questions, sneakily slipping the topic of family into the conversation. Kazan went from asking how long he knew Yahiko and Konan to asking if he had any siblings. Nagato instantly tensed at this, and because of that singular move, Kazan now had his answer. "My mother, Kushina, is your older sister, isn't she? How do you come to that conclusion?" Nagato questioned. Kazan replied by saying, "When I asked you if you had siblings you tensed up. Just like how you tense up each time I mention my mother. It's not hard to put 2 and 2 together when you give obvious hints like that, Nagato. Which do you prefer, uncle or sensei?" There was a brief moment of silence. "Just stick with sensei for now. If you call me Uncle, Yahiko will bombard us with questions non-stop." Kazan agrees and mentally praises himself for achieving his goal before the deadline. Meanwhile in Konoha, Minato POV. Ever since he showed up, mine and Kushina's lives have been nothing but hell. The whole village are ganging up on the Uchiha and blaming them for every bad thing that has happened since the Kyuubi attack. Poor Fugaku is under so much pressure. The more he tries to prove that he and the clan are innocent, the more arguments it raises. As a loyal shinobi, he is trying his hardest to abide by Konoha's laws to prove their innocence, but his clan is starting to rebel against him and his leadership. If this keeps up, it'll spark a civil war and other villages may invade. Not to mention Madara might attack in our moment of weakness. It is clear that with every passing day he is becoming more and more hungry for chaos. He goes around the nations and wreaks havoc on civilians and shinobi alike. His threats become more and more bold by the day, and sacred items have even started going missing. Everything was just such a mess. And all thanks to a man who should be dead for over 50 years now. I growled in frustration as I slammed my elbows on the desk while tugging my hair. Damn it all. I closed my eyes tightly while tugging my hair harder and gritting my teeth. Minato. Kushina says my name, her voice laced in worry. I turn my head and see her standing in the doorway of the study room, concern brimming from her violet eyes. You should take a break. You've been working day and night and barely get any rest. Lack of sleep is bad for your mental health, Ebane. I let out a long tired sigh as she stands beside me and gives me a loving hug. You need to sleep, at least for this one night. That little bit of rest will take you a long way. You can't come up with solutions if you're too tired to think. Seeing the look in her eyes broke me. She has already been so worried every day since the kidnapping. She always smiles even though deep down she isn't really happy. I didn't want to put any more weight on her shoulders, so I gave in. Alright, I'll get some sleep, I say as I stand up from the office chair. Relief washes over her features as her lips form into a small smile. Third person POV. Minato went to bed to get a moment of peaceful shut-eye, but unbeknownst to him, chaos was about to strike the leaf yet again. Third person POV. Minato went to bed to get a moment of peaceful shut-eye, but unbeknownst to him, chaos was about to strike the leaf yet again. In the midst of the forest within the Uchiha compound, hiding under the cover of darkness was Obito. Once the clan members all settled down after returning home from the meeting, the masked Uchiha made his move. He went from house to house, warping inside using Kamui and sucking up all the members of the household. He only did this with lower-ranking and corrupted members of the clan, trapping them inside his Kamui time-space. After getting all the targets Kuro Zetsu had mentioned, Obito shunshined away, leaving no evidence he was ever there. Upon entering his Kamui dimension, he was met with the sight of a pile of dead bodies and Madara wearing a rather bored expression, his cloak soaked in blood. That's everyone on the list Kuro gave us. Madara grunted and sheaths his sword. After that they both exit the dimension and Madara orders Obito to dispose of the bodies but keep all the Sharingan. He was about to protest but upon seeing the elder's stern soul-freezing gaze he bit his tongue and obeyed. The next day, September 16th, the entire village was in a state of absolute chaos. Fugaku was furious, rage burning brighter than that of an inferno. His Sharingan drilling straight through whoever was in his line of sight. And that was everyone. He demanded to know what happened and why over 30 members of the Uchiha clan went missing overnight. The heads of the other clans were cold as ice towards Fugaku, not caring at all about the missing individuals. It was no secret that some members of the clan were rebelling and threatening to leave. It was why none of them took Fugaku seriously. In fact, they were actually glad the Uchiha clan was being torn apart. This infuriated Fugaku even more and he stormed out of the meeting hall. Minato was the only one out of everybody there who sided with Fugaku and stood by him through everything. So, he asked Hiruzen to take over and excused himself from the meeting, going after Fugaku. As his friend, Minato offered support in a difficult time, and as Hokage he made it his top priority to find the missing Uchiha clan members. Minato and Fugaku went into the houses of the missing people and looked for any signs of forced entry or a struggle. They found none. A thought clicked into Minato's mind and his gaze darkened. "Fugaku, I think I know what happened here," said Minato in a grim voice. What happened? Tell me." Fugaku's voice was laced with earnestness, his eyes still glowing with rage he was trying his hardest to suppress. "I think it was Madara," Minato answered in a tone barely above a whisper as a dark shadow covered his face. Fugaku's breath hitched in his throat. His rage had increased tremendously, but the natural fear and intimidation associated to Madara's name overpowered it and he froze. After about 5 more minutes of discussing with Fugaku, Minato returned to the meeting with Flying Raiden to share this piece of information. As soon as he had finished explaining what really happened to the Uchiha, panic struck. If Madara did that to his own clan, would he do it to the rest of the clans in Konoha? Were their families to share the same fate as the 30 Uchiha who were now declared dead? After that one meeting, the state of chaos in the Leaf only worsened by the day. Madara continued kidnapping and killing multiple individuals from various clans for the heck of it, and the stress from this situation weighed heavily on Minato as the Hokage. The guilt from it all was taking its toll on him as well. He knew that Madara was doing this to spite him. Meanwhile in the shadows, Madara was gaining great satisfaction from Minato's suffering. "Now then, let's see how long it will be until you finally crack under the pressure. This dance is only just getting started." Third person Pav. After 3 days of causing chaos in the Leaf, Madara and Obito split up. Obito went to Kirigakure to put the Mizukage under a genjutsu and recruit 2 members of the 7 ninja swordsmen. Meanwhile, Madara stayed within the borders of the Leaf and kept a keen eye on the shinobi there. Specifically 3 young prodigies that really piqued his interest. 2 were orphans and 1 was the son of a clan head. These 3 prodigies were Shisui Uchiha, Itachi Uchiha and Shikayoru Nara. The Uchiha elder stayed within the borders of Konoha, waiting for nightfall to strike under the cover of darkness. This would be his final interaction with Konoha until he started Project Tsuki no Mi. Time skip a few hours later. Since Shikayoru was only half Nara, she lived outside of the Nara compound. She stayed in an apartment with her mother who was frail from an incurable disease until she died 2 months ago. Now the young girl lived there alone, and considering that it wasn't anywhere near the Nara compound, it was no challenge at all for Madara to get to her. Now the only thing left to do was to get into the Uchiha compound to get Itachi and Shisui. This would prove to be a bit more of a challenge, but still no sweat for the legendary shinobi. Itachi Pav. A.N. At the moment Itachi is 10 years old and a Junin and Shisui is 13 and an Anbu. Shisui shunshined next to me by our meeting place next to the Naka River. "Why did you ask me to meet you here this late, Shisui?" I asked. "Itachi, we cannot trust the Anbu or the root," he answered before wincing slightly in pain as his hand shot to his arm. It was only then that I noticed the gash in his shoulder and all the blood leaking from it. I immediately bolted to his side, quickly pulling out the first aid kit in my ninja kit and began wrapping him up. "Shisui, What happened? I asked in a serious tone laced in concern as I wrapped his wound. Danzo. He said that he just wanted to talk, but then, he started acting strangely. The rude Anbu members around him too. I tried using Koto Amatsukami on him, but he broke out of it, and tried to steal my right eye. What I heard made my blood boil and my Sharingan automatically activated. I used the substitution jutsu to get away, but one of his root members managed to hit me with a kunai before I could teleport away, and it cut pretty deep. He says in between winces as I finish wrapping his wound. Well, that's on you for trusting the shinobi of this village. A voice came from behind us. Both Shisui and I immediately got into our fighting stances, Sharingan activated and Anbu swords unsheathed. We were ready to attack but froze immediately as soon as we made eye contact with the mysterious being. He wore a red mask with black markings, had long spiky black hair and wore a black hooded cloak with oversized sleeves. Two Sharingan glowed brightly through the holes of his mask and his chakra was on a whole other level. There was no doubt. It's you, Madara, I say, my voice laced in anger. He's the reason that the clan was in shambles. That the village was at the brink of a civil war. My grip on my sword's handle tightens as rage fills my whole body. But I didn't dare make a move. As hard as I tried, my body wouldn't respond. Itachi, Shisui, why suck up to a village as pathetic as Konoha? Why suck up to anyone at all? You are Uchiha. You are prodigies. You have so much potential. Why waste it running around and completing every order thrown your way like a bunch of animals in a circus act? He speaks as he began walking towards us. When in a serious situation like this, we had two options: fight or flight. Knowing that fleeing was useless and that fighting was suicide, both our bodies chose the third option. Freeze. Pathetic. Hashirama's rules have corrupted my clan and turned them into a bunch of lapdogs for the Konoha Council. The fact that peasants like you are considered prodigies in today's age is proof of how low this clan has fallen. Before we could react, we heard his voice right behind us again. It's so infuriating. And then a sharp pain shot through the back of my neck and everything became hazy as I fell to the ground with a thud. I heard a second thud and saw Shisui fall as well. We lay there, defenseless, and unable to do anything other than listen to Madara's voice as he towered over both of our limp bodies. But regardless, you are the best options I have. So, both of you brats, are coming with me. Despite fighting it as hard as I could, my eyelids involuntarily shut and everything turned to black as I lost consciousness. Shisui POV. I begin regaining consciousness and all the sounds around me become clearer and clearer. They were still distorted though, and it was difficult for me to open my eyes. Through my blurred vision I see the figures of three people. One was definitely Madara's. The second looked to be another Uchiha, but from his voice I could tell he was much younger. The third figure was quite strange. Only his torso was visible, as if his lower body was melted into the ground. I try to force myself awake but fail and slip back into my unconscious state for a few brief seconds only to wake up again and repeat the same cycle. Their voices were still distorted but slowly started sounding clearer as I finally started fully waking up. What the hell, Madara? Itachi and Shisui of all people? And not only them, you took a toddler too? The younger Uchiha shouts, to which Madara has no response other than a slightly annoyed facial expression. You said you needed high-ranking shinobi for your little scavenger hunting team, the Akatsuki, so I brought them to you. But if you're so dissatisfied with who I brought, then feel free to take them back. Madara says in a monotonous voice. I'm not going all the way to Konoha just to take them back. And it's too risky anyways. Itachi is Fugaku's son, there's no doubt he already noticed that he's missing. I could get caught, then stop complaining. Simple as that, Madara says in an annoyed voice before grunting. Hey, a new voice speaks. What is it, Kuro Zetsu? The Uchiha ghost asks in an irritated manner. The curly-haired one is awake, sir. A fourth voice, Shiroi Zetsu, speaks. I tense as both Uchiha rogues' gazes fall on me. The younger Uchiha, a teenager to my surprise, smacks his lips and continues complaining. Great, now we really can't let them go. It's only a matter of time before he realizes who I am. That sentence had fully caught my attention and my line of vision fixated on the masked teenager. I couldn't see his face, but his chakra. I sensed familiarity in it. It was faint, but it was definitely there. I knew him. Since you said it yourself, they aren't going anywhere. They are officially your problem now, brat. Madara says in a bored tone as he begins losing interest. So you're gonna leave just like that? He received no response. Oh sure. Dump them on little old me. It's not like I already have Kazan to take care of. Not to mention Kisame Mangetsu and the AIM trio, Nagato Yahiko and Konan. He continued ranting, causing Madara to get up and walk away out of annoyance. At this moment I heard the sound of shuffling next to me and noticed that Itachi was fully awake and struggling in the grasp of wood wrapped around him? I looked at what was binding me and saw the same thing. What, Mokutan? Madara didn't have wood style. So this must be his doing. I looked back at the masked Uchiha who was still ranting. What am I to you? A free babysitter? That sounds about right. Madara mutters in an annoyed tone as he exits the room, fed up with the barrage of complaints. The bi-colored man with green hair who definitely wasn't human melts into the ground, and now Itachi and I were alone with this faintly familiar teenager. Obito Pav. I grit my teeth as I glare daggers at Madara's back while he leaves. You're an even worse pain in the butt than Bakashi. I mumble in a tone just above a whisper. Immediately after that I hear surprised exclamations from the two hostage Uchiha. Looks like they recognized me. No use in wearing this anymore. Since you clearly know who I am now. I mumble as I take my mask off. This is gonna be a long week. Back in AIM, September 17th. After finally coming clean to Kazan about who he was and their relation, Nagato was more at ease. He was finally perfectly comfortable around his nephew. However, he still had that sense of guilt about complying with Madara's plan. Regardless, he loved spending time with Kazan. Vice versa too. As the deadline of his visit in Omegakure approached, the boy actually felt sad about the fact he had to leave. He only had one more day there, since he couldn't really count the fifth because Obito would pick him up at 8 in the morning. After waking up on the fourth day, Kazan had a request for Nagato. Nagato-sensei, I have a request. Nagato-sensei, I have a request. Since it's my last training session with you today before Toby comes to fetch me tomorrow morning, I want to learn something different. Can you train me in Genjutsu? Seeing the great interest Kazan showed in the category of Genjutsu, Nagato agreed to teach him. It didn't take Kazan very long to be able to cast strong illusions, and he easily began to tell the difference between reality and an illusion. Kazan enjoyed Genjutsu training. He enjoyed it even more than his ninjutsu training and showed great skill in the category. In his first day of training with Genjutsu, Kazan was able to cast B-rank illusions and break out of a ranked Genjutsu with no sweat. However, casting and breaking so many Genjutsu after one another took up more of his chakra than training with regular jutsu did. Because of how much chakra Kazan exerted throughout his constant training, he was flat out exhausted when he was done. So exhausted that during his break he fell asleep. Seeing his nephew's peaceful state while sleeping, Nagato picked him up and took him to bed. Kazan didn't stir or respond as Nagato moved him because of what a deep slumber he was in. Kazan was in such a deep sleep that he was able to enter the deepest, darkest part of his mind, and while there he came across something very strange. A small sphere of light floating around in the pitch-black landscape. What is this? I sense a presence coming off of it. Kazan stared at the floating orb, watching as it flickered with a look of confusion and curiosity on his face. Chakra? But whose? He inched closer to the orb, slowly extending his hand. As soon as he made contact with the sphere, a wave of chakra was forced into his body, filling his entire chakra system. Sensing the new chakra flowing through Kazan's body, a chakra he was all too familiar with, Kurama woke up and forcefully pulled Kazan into his part of the boy's psyche. Kazan was still confused by what happened and thought it was a dream. Kurama stared him in an analytic way, studying his body and aura to see if anything was strange or out of place. He picked up nothing and was relieved that Kazan was fine. If he had done anything to corrupt his chakra, my promise would be for naught. Kazan was still stumped about what exactly happened, but was still flat out exhausted, so he left the psyche plane and went back to sleep. Unknown Pav. Now that we have some sort of connection, I can finally contact him. If I'm careful enough, I can convince the boy to free me and advance with my plan. I just have to approach him correctly. First impressions are very important. Third person Pav. After the strange encounter, Kazan felt that something was off with his chakra. It was more negative and didn't exactly feel like his own. Almost as if it had been contaminated with someone else's hatred. But he could tell it wasn't Kurama's. So what was really going on here? Kurama became very bothered by this as well because with each passing second, Kazan's chakra only became more and more dark. So dark that it started reminding him about something, or rather someone, he didn't want to remember. Kazan had learned to suppress his chakra thanks to spending time with Kabuto a while back, so no one other than himself and Kurama knew about this change in his physical energy. After being taken home, Kazan put his training on hold and focused more on reading to distract himself. The darkness in his chakra felt like a demonic shadow slowly corrupting him, in a way much worse than back when Kurama tried breaking the seal. Throughout the day he randomly heard a faint whisper. A ghostly voice calling his name. It crept him out but he kept to himself. Unfortunately, and much to Kurama's annoyance, Kuro noticed the change in Kazan's chakra. He too, being familiar with the presence slowly corrupting Kazan, found it quite entertaining and laughed to himself each time he passed the boy. September 19th. What's so funny, Kuro? Shiroi asked him. Oh, nothing much. Just that someone I know is finally coming out of the shadows. Kuro chuckled to himself in a really dark tone, putting Shiroi on edge and making Kurama growl inside Kazan's psyche. Knowing what was happening to Kazan and who was behind it, the crafty shadow-like creature began formulating a plan to get Kazan to make contact with the mysterious being. After all, with Obito beginning to get suspicious of him, a backup plan could come in handy. And the man corrupting Kazan was the perfect plan B to achieving his goal. The only way to get Kazan to make contact with this mysterious man was to infuriate him until he used the corrupted chakra. That was going to be easy considering how much the boy hated him. All he had to do was wait for the perfect chance when no one was around to see what he was doing. Kazan Pav. Kuro is definitely up to something. That smirk on his face could tell me as much. It creeps me out each time he fights back his laughter. Like he knows what's going on. Maybe he does. But one thing was certain. That strange ghostly whisper I keep hearing definitely creeps me out way more than Kuro's ugly mug. Besides being skin-crawling and the stuff of nightmares, the voice actually gave useful advice. I noticed this while playing a game of shogi with Oji-san. Usually he'd beat me, but this time I won the game. And all thanks to advice given to me by the strange voice. It helped me out with a bunch of other stuff too. Something really interesting is what it said to me when I looked at Kuro a few minutes earlier. He's a wolf in sheep's clothing. Don't trust him. If that wasn't a huge red flag about Kuro, I didn't know what was. Aniki didn't trust him. Kyuubi didn't trust him. I didn't trust him, and now neither does the voice. Maybe it wasn't as bad as I thought? Third person Pav. But Kazan was wrong. The person behind the eerie voice in his head was anything but good. And his plans for the shinobi world were much darker than Madara's. Slowly but surely, the voice began to get Kazan to lower his guard. He had been watching for quite some time now, so he knew Kuro would make his move at any given time. He just had to wait for the opportunity, and once it arrived, he would pounce. He didn't have to wait very long either. Kazan Pav. October 6th. Well, what have we here? What's wrong, little fox? Why the long face? I glanced at Kuro, my gaze penetrating him like a sharp knife, evident distrust and suspicion glowing inside them. The shadow-like figure then put on a devious smirk and spoke in that innocent tone that I despised with every cell in my body. Kazan, did anything strange happen to you recently? Hearing any ghosts whispering in your ears? Kuro asked as innocently as he could to push my buttons. He was trying to get me angry for something. As much as I wanted to yell at him or rip him a new one, I suppressed my rage and channeled it all into only glaring at him. Whatever it is you want, Kuro, I'm not giving it to you. Leave me alone, I say in a blunt and unfriendly tone, before grunting and diverting my eyes away from his hideous face and back to my book. Of course, he does the exact opposite and continues pestering me. You know, your chakra feels different. He comments in a suspicious voice. So that's what this is about. I take it he knows the person behind the voice in my head. It's darker, more ominous, a bit concerning. So tell me, what exactly do you have planned here? His words make me look back at him and raise an eyebrow. He was fully aware of how much I distrusted and disliked him. Was he trying to set me up for something? At this moment, in the back of my mindscape, the Kyuubi woke up and let out a deep earth-quaking growl. The voice in my head spoke up too. Keep your cool. He's trying to trick you. My eyes narrow down on him once again and I spike a small bit of my chakra defensively as a signal for him to back off. Well, answer me. What little plan are you devising to foil Project Tasuki no Mi? What the hell are you doing? Kuros reverts back to his usual entitled and commanding tone. This really started to peeve me and I was about to snap when the voice stopped me. Remember what I said, boy? No matter how hard he makes it, don't attack him. I take a deep breath and exhale, releasing as much tension as possible to keep my cool. Calmly, I get up and look Kuro's clone dead in the eye. Faces centimeters apart with myself towering a few inches above him. Listen here you piece of crap. You may get away with that entitled attitude around Oji-san and Aniki, but don't think for a second you can get away with it around me. Don't think for a millisecond that you have me fooled either. I know you have something planned. And one way or another I will expose you. He grit his teeth and I continued while leaking some malice to show how dead serious I was. I don't trust you one bit and I don't like you either. My health, well-being, and chakra signature are none of your business, so keep your non-existent nose out of it. You mean nothing to me and I want nothing to do with you. Now get the hell out of my sight and never talk to me again unless you want me sealed away. Third person Pav. At this point Kuro was growling at Kazan, but as much as he wanted to, he knew he couldn't do anything to harm the boy. It enraged him even more. And in that moment of rage, he said something that really hit a nerve. For a brat, you sure as hell have a big mouth on you. Obito's obnoxiousness rubbed off on you. Guess I better give you a lecture to set you straight. Kuro emerged fully from the ground and this time, he was the one towering over Kazan. This had no effect on the boy though, and he stood firm in his spot, glaring harder with every passing second. Respect your elders or I'll show you the consequences. Kuro says with a scowl on his face, angry that Kazan used such a tone with him. Hearing Kuro starting to lecture him like he was some sort of parent to him, leaned on Kazan's last nerve. The boy feels his eyes begin to sting slightly as his vision sharpens and that same dark chakra from earlier leaks into his system. Kurama didn't like Kuro's tone either, so the fox spiked his hatred, infecting Kazan's chakra with even more negativity and Kazan's eyes glowed red as his pupils turned to slits. But the dark chakra overpowers Kurama's hatred and the pattern in Kazan's eyes changes from a slit pupil to a 3-tomo Sharingan. Kuro begins chuckling as he sees himself successfully achieve his goal. You can't help but become enraged. You're just like that fox. Better yet, you're just like Indra. This won't be difficult at all. That pattern in your eyes is proof of it. A look of confusion spreads across Kazan's face. Pattern? What? Third person Pav. Kuro chuckling as he sees himself successfully achieve his goal. The more satisfaction he felt, the louder he laughed until the point where he was straight up cackling like a psychopath. You can't help but become enraged at the mere sight of me. You're just like that damn fox inside of you. Better yet, you're just like Indra. This won't be difficult at all. It's all such a breeze. I will never fail in getting what I want. That pattern in your eyes is proof of it. Kuro begins laughing again and a look of confusion spreads across Kazan's face. P-pattern? What? He mumbled to himself, totally clueless and just puzzled. Kuro finally stops laughing and says, he's taking control. At this, Kurama's eyes shoot wide open. You're turning into him. Sooner or later you'll fall victim to darkness. To the endless void of hatred just like your ancestor. The evil will corrupt you. It's an inescapable fate now. Enjoy your hell, Otsutsuki reincarnate. Kazan was still completely confused and didn't make a single move. Kurama, however, the fox growled louder, finally losing his temper and all control of himself. Kurama explodes with anger, leaking the most massive waves of chakra and ki that he could as a powerful earth-quaking roar left his throat. An explosion of chakra spews out of the seal, forming a much smaller version of the fox next to Kazan. Stop corrupting my Jinchuriki, you bastard. The fox then opens its mouth widely and blasts a mini Biju Dama at Kuro, destroying the clone. After Kuro's clone was completely destroyed, Kurama's chakra above Kazan fades away and disappear into nothing like it was never there and nothing happened. Kazan couldn't believe what just happened. The Nine Tails protected him? Before he could come to reality and properly process what happened, he was pulled into his psyche. Don't listen to a damn word uttered by that scumbag. Don't let him corrupt you nor get into your head. As soon as that happens you will lose everything. Yet another weird surprise for the day. You just spoke. Kurama stayed quiet, still uncomfortable with speaking to a human. Seeing as, it's been 2,000 years since he last did so. And he didn't even know if Kazan truly was the shinobi of prophecy, so he was conflicted about if his moves were the right ones. After all, he didn't even fully trust Kazan, so why reveal everything to him now? In fact, why reveal anything and risk screwing over the other Biju? Was this the right move? He then heard a faint voice in the back of his head. A voice that sounded like Hagoromo. It's the right thing to do, Kurama. Just trust the process. Trust him. The rewards will be priceless, my son. Father, even after death, you still guide me. The Kyuubi closes his eyes before finally replying. Yes, I can talk, and I know what is happening to you. That chakra is corrupting you. It's feeding on your anger and growing ever stronger each time you are enraged. Block it. Keep training your mind and strengthen your mental state as much as possible. It's the only way to resist. Don't let it consume you. Don't let him get a grip on you. Those were the last words the Biju spoke before forcing Kazan out of the psyche plane. The boy stood in the backyard of the base, frozen in one spot as he thought over everything that just happened. Who was this character Kyuubi was warning him about? Kuro mentioned a name earlier after his fit of psychopathic laughter. Indra. He mutters just above a whisper while deep in thought. Did you say something to just now? Kabuto asked out of the blue, catching Kazan off guard, making him flinch. Don't sneak up on me like that, Four Eyes. Kazan says, annoyed. Kabuto replies with, I didn't sneak. You just had your guard down. Pretty out of character for you. You alright? I'm fine, just deep in thought. What are you doing here anyway? Kazan asked, puzzled as to why the Silverette was at Madara's base. Tobi called Orochimaru-sama over to heal an infected cut of one of the new recruits. I just tagged along. Kabuto answers. New recruits? Geez, how many surprises am I gonna have today? This is getting annoying. That's all for now. If you enjoy, then please like, share and do comments.